Okay, so these are dissected motor fiber, or not motor fibers, skeletal muscle fibers. Okay? And you can tell they're skeletal muscle because even at this magnification, you can start to see the striations. Okay? So these lines right here, they're actually axons coming in to innervate. Okay? And there they are. These are the boutons right here. And every little tiny dot you see is a synapse. Okay? So, yeah. And here it is under higher power. And now that it's under higher power, we can see the striations a little bit better. We can see the black dots. Right? So here's one right here. Here's a wire coming in. And you can see from here to here is one Schwann cell. Okay? And between here and here, well, there and there is a node of Ranvier. Okay, and then there's another Schwann cell, and then here's your terminal synaptic bouton. And the bouton is a lot of little synapses. Here we're looking at it sideways, here we're looking at it down. And when it's down, you can see all the little dots. So that's the wiring of the skeletal muscle. And here's more of the same. Okay. So now these are like, see, wires coming in with multiple axons, branching and branching and branching, and finally branching into one where it's innervating one muscle cell. Okay, which is pretty cool the way that looks. Okay, so here is a cross section of a nerve, basically, which has a bunch of nerve fibers in it. So if we did a cross section of this right here, or right here, it would look like this. Okay, so all those little tiny circles, and if you use your imagination, well, you don't have to, because we could do a higher magnification, now you can see some little tiny circles. Each one of those circles is an axon. Okay, and we do higher magnification, now we can start to see the different axons. Okay, now if we go back, we have to invent a name for the connective tissues. Okay, so let's invent the names. Okay, epineurium is the connective tissue surrounding the whole bundle of bundles. That's epineurium. Okay, I guess that's the black arrow. Then we do endoneurium. Will be around the bundle. Oh, wait a minute, that's wrong. Because this arrow, it's a black arrow. Black arrow is here. Okay, so let's do this. Let's make another black arrow, so that way it makes sense to me. Okay, so let's put this black arrow, Control, copy, Control V, and we'll get that arrow and put it down here too. Okay, because that's the epineurium. The epineurium, here's a black arrow right there too. Okay, so that makes more sense to my brain. So the black arrow is the epineurium. That's the connective tissue on the outside. On the outside. Okay, this will be on the outside. So that's epineurium. Okay, perineurium is the connective tissue around individual bundles. Okay, perineurium, blue area around individual bundles. Okay, then there's endoneurium. Whoops. Endoneurium would be connective tissue around individual axons. That would be endoneurium. So remember this terminology because we're going to apply it to skeletal muscle too. So epimysium, perimysium, and endomysium is connective tissue around or within skeletal muscle, in and around skeletal muscle. Epineurium, perineurium, endoneurium is the connective tissue in and around nerves. Okay? And a nerve fiber is the same as an axon. It's the same thing. Okay? This is a blood vessel right here. Okay, so instead of cutting it on cross-section, we're cutting it in a longitudinal section. So that would be like looking at this under higher magnification and more light. Okay, it would look like this. Okay, which kind of looks like dense regular connective tissue, unless you look at it under higher power, and you can start to see these little areas right here and here. Those are the nodes of Ranvier between Schwann cells. Here it is under higher power. There's a node, there's a node, there's a node. So there's all kinds of nodes that you can find in here. So then at higher power, it starts to look like nerve fibers because of the Schwann cells.
Why does the node of Longier look thicker than?
Because it's the axon is one membrane thick. The node of Ranvier, they're not thicker. Let's look at it here. Okay, so here's the clear area in here is the axon. The node of Ranvier is the edge of the Schwann cell, and this Schwann cell goes from here to here. And the axon is this, if you use your imagination, you can see this cylindrical thing in there. So, yeah, see this? Well, you really can't see the axon because very well, but it's in there. This line represents the edge of it. Okay?
So it's this little...
It's a little tube surrounded by wrappings of membrane of a Schwann cell.
I meant what we're looking at, that little line between this.
Yeah, that's the node. That's your node of Ranvier. Yeah.
The shorter the axon, would it send the signal faster?
Okay, we'll talk about saltatory conduction later. I will answer that question, but right now it's inappropriate in terms of the context. Okay? But I will answer that question, and it's going to make sense to you. Okay? You do have a little bit of electrical understanding, right, of wiring?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, so it's going to make a lot of sense to you, more so than someone that doesn't have that, background, wiring and voltage and that crap, yeah, so it's going to make sense. So, you've seen this already, and we were talking about the degree of myelinization. This slide is actually stained for myelin, and the black area or the dark brown areas are really the myelinization. So epineurium, perineurium, and in between these axons, in here, not the myelin, but in between is the endoneurium. Okay, so here is a node of Ranvier. My buddy dissected some nerves. Out, one at a time, and I dissected. And he must not have had a life. Okay, I'm not kidding. To spend this much time doing this in a laboratory, and he was single and not out chasing girls, there had to be something wrong. Or he really loved science. So he was really a nice guy. And he gave me all his slides so I could share them with you. And I took these pictures from his slides. He gave me the slides and said, "Here, Davi, take all my slides, I'm retiring." And then after he retired, a few days later, he was dead.
Oh, no.
So he gave me his slides. So wherever I go, I take them. I keep telling myself I'm going to write a book called MicroAnatomy, a teaching approach, and I never got around to it. I still may do it. So here is a section of a ganglion. So all these right here, these little dots, those are nerve cell bodies. Here they are in their high power. So all these other dots are satellite cells, because this is a ganglion. Okay. Again, a ganglion is a collection of nerve cell bodies outside the central nervous system. Okay, so these satellite cells are really what? Astrocytes and microglia in the ganglion. That's really what they are. Here's a little bit of adipose, and you can see they're kind of like lining up, and that means you have an axon coming in or going out. I don't know which it is. Okay. And as it turns out, this is a sympathetic chain ganglion, which we'll talk about later. So the central nervous system, okay, here is a section through the spinal cord of a mouse. Okay, and it doesn't matter because the anatomy is the same in humans and in mice and rats and any vertebrate. Okay, so here's what the cross section looks like, and you can tell, these lines right here, those lines represent separate pictures. So this is a montage of separate pictures that I pasted together. So then I decided, well, let's not just have a picture. Let's remember, I'm home, alone, drinking beer, no job.
Sure.
Okay. So I labeled all these for you. Okay. Okay, so this would be the posterior horn. You can tell it's a posterior horn because it goes to the edge. The anterior horn right here doesn't go to the edge. So you can tell what's posterior and anterior. Here's the dorsal root ganglion. Okay? Dorsal root ganglion is coming in. Okay? So the wiring, the axons come in and they enter right here. So the dorsal root ganglion, that's where all of the pseudo-unipolar neurons are. You don't find them anywhere else, just there. Okay? Pseudo-unipolar only in the dorsal root ganglion, and the dorsal root ganglion is purely sensory. Okay? The ventral horn, or the anterior horn, now they call them anterior horn or ventral horn, and they call the posterior horn or dorsal horn. It's all the same thing. Okay? So you have a central canal too. Remember the spinal cord and the brain started out as a tube? There's the remnant of the tube, central canal. So the posterior horn is purely motor. The anterior horn, the posterior horn is purely sensory, incoming information. The anterior horn or the ventral horn is purely motor. Okay? And if you have a lateral horn, that's somatic motor, and we'll deal with, that's sympathetic motor or autonomic nervous system motor. Okay? It's not somatic, because somatic motor is the ventral horn. Remember, somatic motor, voluntary skeletal muscle. Okay? And the motor horns for the autonomic nervous system are the lateral. And we'll deal with that later. So here's the anterior root. So this is the nerve coming on. And the anterior root is purely motor. The posterior root is purely sensory. So you have incoming and outgoing. And the posterior root and the anterior root combine after the dorsal root ganglion. So then now you have a mixed nerve, motor and sensory. Right? It's bringing two wires together. That's all it is. One sensory coming in, one motor going out. So it's a mixed nerve out here. Okay? Is there anything in here I left off? I don't think so. So let's add some more stuff. Okay? So here's the posterior median sulcus, and here's the anterior median fissure. And notice the fissure has this dark line in it, because you can separate the fissure and you can look in, but you can't separate a sulcus. It's stuck together. So fissures run deep, sulcus run shallow. Okay? So again, there's your central canal. And this is white matter out here, and this is gray matter. Now the reason why it doesn't look white and gray is because it's been stained. Okay? So the gray matter is a butterfly shape. I like to think of it as a... Okay, anyway. So this is a montage. You can tell this is really a montage now. You know, and you could, go like this and actually separate pictures if you wanted to. Okay. So I put these together so that you can see the cerebral cortex. This is what it looks like. So these are tracks down here. These are axons. And all these little dots right here are pyramidal cells. Pyramidal cells, a multipolar neuron. The cerebral cortex is where the pyramidal cells are. Okay? And I don't know what these little boogers are up here. Okay? But these are all the cells. And all these are neurons, and you have a billion of them. Now keep in mind, this is a really, really thin slice of brain. Very, very thin. It's so thin that if I had a big sheet of it, and it wasn't stained, I can see through it. Okay? That's how thin this is. And look how many neurons you have on this really, really thin section. So you have billions of neurons in your brain. Here it is under higher power. That's it. Again, even higher power, and even higher power. You can see here. I go one of these holes. They're not holes. They're capillaries. Okay. Here's one cut on kind of like a longitudinal section. Okay. Those are capillaries. Now we were looking at the cerebrum. Now let's look at the cerebellum. The cerebellum looks like this. It looks different. Okay. The Purkinje cells are in here. These little brown dots are the cell body or the soma of Purkinje fibers, Purkinje neurons. Okay, and this is what it looks like. So this is a comparison of cerebellum and cerebral cortex. Okay, and we're done. Okay, so